There comes a point when the men who stood beside you in fire can no longer walk with you in silence. Not because they're wrong, not because they're broken, but because the relationship was forged in heat. And once the flame goes out, so too does the connection. Some friendships were built on shared resistance, shared wounds, shared story. And when you stop needing the story, the friendship quietly begins to dissolve. Not in betrayal, not in anger, but in frequency. You are no longer who you were. And the resonance that once tethered you together no longer holds. This is what happens when a man becomes coherent. He doesn't lose people, he simply stops adjusting his field to accommodate for their incoherence. And so naturally they fall away. Sometimes softly, sometimes loudly, sometimes with quiet rage, but always with revelation. Because when you become structure, you begin to see who was leaning on you for balance and who was standing beside you in true alignment. I had a friendship once that felt sacred. It mirrored parts of me that still needed understanding. It reflected the places in me that longed to be held, to be seen, to be supported. But I came to understand that some people don't really love you. They love who they can be whilst near you. They love the feeling of your field without necessarily respecting its architecture. And when your field becomes so sovereign that you no longer allow entanglement, when you no longer respond to emotional cues designed to keep you soft and available, you become the villain in their story because you're no longer holding space for the part of them that refused to grow. And so the narrative begins to shift. You're cold, you're distant, arrogant, you've changed. And yes, you have, but not as punishment, as evolution. There are no villains in this story, only misalignment. And if you try to force alignment after you've become coherent, you will suffer. Not because they hurt you, but because you're bending your own structure to remain lovable to someone who only knew you when you were still seeking. Some friendships, especially the emotionally enmeshed ones, are not built on truth. They're built on silent agreements. I'll never leave you. I will always explain myself to you. I will stay emotionally available no matter what you project onto me. These were the contracts you didn't know you signed until you stop showing up the same way, until you speak less, respond less, justify nothing, and then the friendship begins to unravel. Not because you were cruel, but because silence became your structure, and silence cannot be manipulated. There was a day I knew it was done, not with a fight, not with goodbye, but with a moment of stillness, a text left unanswered, a projection left unsoothed, a pattern no longer fed. And in that stillness, the thread snapped. I didn't explain, not initially. I didn't perform closure, not straight away. I simply didn't respond the same way as I always had. Not to punish, but because the version of me they were still trying to reach was gone. And when they reached again, there was no signal, no field to pull from, just clean, open space where a bond used to be. This is how a sovereign man begins to end things, not with noise, but with precision, not with drama, but with withdrawal. This episode is not about bitterness, it's about recognition. It's about honoring what the friendship gave you, even if it ended with distortion. Because The truth is, every bond that collapses under the weight of your coherence was never meant to last into your stillness. It was always meant to serve the fire, to awaken you, to reveal you, to test you, and then dissolve. Like scaffolding, once the temple is built, it's no longer required. This is especially true of friendships with a certain type of energy coded into them. Emotional containment, subtle control, support that felt sacred but was laced with invisible threads of expectation. When you step away from being needed, you see how much of the relationship was built on your willingness to show up as a rescuer, as a translator, or an energetic cushion. And when you withdraw cleanly and quietly, you become the object of their unresolved grief. You didn't reject them, you simply stopped being available for the version of them that required your distortion in order for them to feel stable. And that's when the accusations begin. You abandoned me. You cut me off. You changed. You never really cared. But you know the truth. You stayed long after you should have. You explained long after you were misunderstood. You carried a weight that was never yours until you didn't. This is friendship after fire. It's the clarity that emerges when the sword is sheathed and you no longer define connection through shared struggle. It's the realization that not every shared past deserves a place in your coherent future. It's the decision to keep walking forward, even if it means walking alone. Not out of superiority, but out of alignment, because a sovereign man does not keep people in his life who require him to distort his signal to stay connected. This is not about friendship, it's about freedom. It's about seeing who reflects your current frequency versus who demands the version of you that no longer exists. It's about holding a boundary without needing to explain it. It's about standing in your field without softening it to make someone else feel safe. And most of all, it's about releasing those who were once vital, once precious, once formative, with honor, but without return. Because your coherence is not a compromise, it is your structure. And anything that asks you to contort it must dissolve. So if someone you once loved no longer knows how to reach you, if they're throwing emotional stones at the silhouette of the man you used to be, let them. You are not theirs. You never were. You are simply holding a version of yourself that was resonant with their story. And now that story has ended, and your part is complete. Let the thread fall. Let the field hold. Let the silence speak. And keep walking forward, sovereign, coherent, unreachable by distortion. This is how friendships end after the fire has cooled. Not in war, but in peace. Not in noise, but in frequency. Not in regret, but in remembrance. You gave what you could, you held what you must, and when it was time, you walked away, cleanly, not with a wound, but with a cleaner signal. The sword is down, the friend is gone, and the field is clean. You are not alone, you are simply aligned. Welcome to The Architect Speaks.